لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
MashaAllah, a nice small masjid with a few people, but your salams is louder and more powerful than most masjids most of the times. MashaAllah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep you strong and committed. MashaAllah. I'd like to first thank the Islamic Centre of East Dagenham and likewise SmallDEEDS for inviting me to present this talk. It's an important talk, and it's the last in a series, I believe, of a number of talks about Masjid al-Aqsa specifically, and perhaps Palestine generally. The title given to me is Masjid al-Aqsa, Our Duties Towards It. And I have 5 slides, not that you can see them, but 5 slides with just a few bullet points on them about Masjid al-Aqsa, and I'm going to broaden it to Palestine as well, and our duty towards the mosque and towards the people in general, the Palestinians. That could be the Muslims of them, as well as the non-Muslims of them, Christians primarily. So the first question, and it's my first slide, why is Palestine so important? I mean, in the 21st century, as it was in the 20th century, tragedy after tragedy, calamity after calamity, mayhem after mayhem, inflicted one majority Muslim country after another. Sometimes it was just political chaos. More often, there was a large human cost involved as well. So out of all of those things, okay, and even now, Syria, Iraq, Kashmir, Rohingya, and Burma, the Muslims in China, in their large numbers, still are under a type of persecution. Plus other places in the world, Central Africa, CAR, Mali, and various other places in Africa, and particularly Central Africa, maybe not so much political, but economic problems, whereby tens and tens of thousands of people, just over the last few years, 5-6 years, have died, Muslims and non-Muslims included. So why is Palestine, amongst all of these things, so important? Actually, that's a question to you all. Any offers? Why is Palestine so important? Why is Masjid al-Aqsa so important? Okay, so Masjid al-Aqsa used to be the first Qibla. So it has a holiness, it has a takhassus, a speciality. Yep.
Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam led the prayers of every other Anbiya, as well as the whole story of Siraj, going up
Isra and Miraj, absolutely. So Masjid al-Aqsa and the kind of surrounding area, it has a sanctity, a hurma, very much tied to the first reason that the brother said. It was there in Masjid al-Aqsa that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam led all of the prophets and the messengers in the prayer. And so it was kind of clear, zahiran, he is Sayyidul Anbiya wal Mursaleen, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is the master of the prophets and the messengers, because generally the rule of thumb is the best leads the prayer, okay? And he sallallahu alaihi wasallam led the prayer, and the Isra, or the Mi'raj rather, the upward journey to the ascent to the heavens happened from there. Any other reason? So
One of the 3 holy mosques.
absolutely, one of the 3 holiest masjids. The first holiest masjid, or the first greatest haram being the haram of Makkah, then the haram of, and then the haram here, Jerusalem, Masjid al-Aqsa. And we're clear, Masjid al-Aqsa is not the beautiful golden domed masjid, probably one of the, if not the greatest architectural feat in the world. It's the smaller masjid with a kind of grey, greeny dome behind it, depending upon where you're standing in the masjid. Okay, that's Masjid al-Aqsa, the golden dome. That's a separate masjid. It has its great significance in our history, but this Masjid al-Aqsa has a great significance in terms of hurma, or religious and spiritual sanctity, in terms of holiness. So it's the third holiest masjid, it's the first qibla. From there the Mi'raj was undertaken. From there that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam led the prophets in the prayer, alayhi salatu wasalam. The masjid and the surrounding area is full of barakah, is blessed. The Imam might want to help me there. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله. Glory be to Allah who took his servant by night from the sacred precinct of Makkah to the furthest precinct, yani Masjid al-Aqsa, alladhi barakna hawlahu, where the environment or the surrounding area is barakah. And the scholars kind of differ. The area around it, how far is it special and barakah? So clearly that area of Jerusalem is barakah. It extends into Syria. This barakah-ness, according to some of the scholars of tafsir, extends into Syria, Sham, and it goes right up until parts of present-day Jordan and Lebanon. All of that area is what is implied, according to the majority of the mufassirun, by this idea of barakna hawlahu. Okay, and there is another reason. Why is Palestine? Why is it such a festering sore in our hearts politically? I mean, more people have probably been killed, more Muslims have probably been killed in Central Africa in just 10 years than Muslims have been killed in Palestine since 1948, or even since 1917. Okay, but why is it such a big, I mean, first and foremost, has it been for the last 40, 50, 60 years a huge political issue amongst the Muslims, the issue of Palestine? Yes. Why? Just for those reasons? Is there something else why not, if we're going to really talk about Muslim suffering, then normally we would talk in terms of numbers. If we were to talk in terms of numbers, then the Palestinians have had it quite easy in terms of deaths. All right? The Chinese Muslims have probably suffered tenfold, perhaps even 100-fold in terms of deaths than Palestinian Muslims. So why is it such an issue? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Why is it still such an issue with us? What is the tragedy about Palestine that is not quite the same as the sufferings of Muslims elsewhere?
Theft of lands. Theft of lands.
Yeah, okay, theft of land, displacement of people. This is true. That could apply to others as well, but this is very true.
Is it the effort put towards, like, say, wiping out of Muslim heritage from that land?
Okay, wiping out of Muslim heritage from that land, but it was wiped out, slate clean, in Muslim Spain, Andalusia, and we don't tend to make a big an issue. We go and visit the Humra, but we don't really make it a big political issue.
I mean, is it
Perhaps.
so the continuation of oppression through many different aspects? For instance, freedom to do the basic things is like, okay, there's not lack of loss of life in comparison to others, but in terms of lack of freedom, it's just as bad as having a life taken from someone. So just the current economical, physical oppression over the years, and obviously that land has so much Islamic history, going through all the majority of the prophets being from that, going in there, the stories behind it. So, I mean, that's one aspect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So here there is no one clear, specific answer. This is not like a fiqh or aqidah question that could have this is really perceptions, how Muslims feel. And I suspect when I started kind of quote unquote practicing Islam back in the early 80s, Palestine was the first major religious cause, followed 2 years later by some of the religious conflicts in India, and particularly the Barbary Masjid. And I remember as a young man, in my early 20s or just before, going on these demonstrations and feeling rather good about myself, I have to add, right, as we tended to do, because we felt that we're now focused on the ummah. What it actually did, amali and practically, that's another issue. It did satisfy one's own kind of like guilt that maybe I should have done something earlier. And I'm sure there's more to it. But one of the things about Palestine, if you think about Palestine, and the various answers you gave, it's not that they're wrong, and they are right. But if I could pull it together in this way, the tragedy of Palestine really encapsulates for the Muslim ummah that great trauma of the Muslim imagination. Let me explain what I mean. So Palestine, Masjid al-Aqsa in particular, first Qibla, the prophets prayed there. It has a sacred history, okay? It has a sacred history. And then Umar radiallahu anhu, the second caliph, he comes into to Jerusalem, and the Prophet ﷺ, his nubuwwah makes it the third holiest place and a haram. His leading the prophets is the clear indication and vindication. This is the leader and the Sayyid of the prophets and the messengers, alayhi salatu wasalam. Umar radiallahu anhu comes in a little later after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he kind of sets the prophetic political way. It's not just politics he brings in a politics that is reflective of the Prophet ﷺ and his compassion, his humility, his sense of tawheed. So we know in the authentic history, tarikh, that Umar radiallahu anhu eventually comes riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. This is possibly the most powerfulest man with the most powerfulest empire, quote, Khilafah, in the world, rapidly expanding. He himself is a Jalali figure, is an awesome figure of a man, as opposed to very Jamali and soft. And he's coming in a way that you don't expect conquerors or leaders of empires to come in. Leaders of empire come in with all the razzmatazz and the glitter their age and time can afford. Because it's a matter of those who are with us, we want to uplift them and their spirits and make them rejoice that yes, we are the boss, we are the top. And those who are not with us, we need to instill a sense of fear and haiba, awe and respect about us. So generals and conquerors tend to come in a very majestic, Jalali way. And here is Umar radiallahu anhu, who knows this, comes in on a donkey, right? I mean, what awe is that in and of itself going to nurture? And then he is asked the Christians, and many of these Christians, or if not them, their parents or their grandparents, and maybe even their great-grandparents, they were forced into Christianity, okay, reluctantly. That area, Palestine, particularly Gaza, the history tells us that they didn't want to be Christians. But in the end, the Pope needed to get his stuff going. He pushed the few buttons, so to speak. And in the end, that region became Christian, quite often reluctantly. I'm not saying that they were all reluctant up until the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, but initially they were. But many of them accepted Islam as soon as the likes of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu came in. And he comes in and they say, do you want to pray in one of the holiest of holies? Or perhaps it is the holiest of the holiest in the Christian world, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is, it's still there, and it's still one of the, if not the greatest site for Christian pilgrims. And he says, no, this would have been a good thing to do just from a worldly political point of view, because you stamp your mark. It's done and dusted. Once you pray in the previous conqueror's most holy place, you've made the statement. You don't have to do any more tweets. It's done. And he refuses. And instead, he asks, where was the place that the Prophet ﷺ made that journey, made the Miraj from? And they pointed to over there. And over there had become, from that time up until Umar radiallahu anhu's time, basically a rubbish heap. Just rubbish, ganj. It was a place that you just throw things. And Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, with his own hands, he cleared it. I mean, he could have just, humility would have been as well. Bismillah, can you just clear it for me? I'm just going to make some 2 rak'ahs after you clear it. That would have been fine. But no, he, radiallahu anhu, clears it with his own hands. And he prays. Humility. He brings in humility into the very core of a political victory. Very unusual. Very soon later, in the Umayyad time, that place there would be the Golden Dome. And the Golden Dome kind of represents, that masjid now represents, the Golden Dome Mosque represents the kind of the triumphant vindication of an empire built on Tawheed. In the Muslim imagination, we've got this Golden Dome, Aqsa there. It has this sacred holy history. It has this political history that, the people of Tawheed, the people of Iman, by the fadl of Allah, by the grace of God, they deserve this. Because it's glorifying the greatness of Allah. What is more deserving than that? In our imagination, that's how it's always been. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi casting out the Christian Crusaders just reinforces that imagination, that actually, in our imagination, the story should be victory for Allah's deen and Tawheed. Victory of the Ahlullah, of the people of God, of the people of Tawheed. Religiously, that's what we expect. Historically, that's what we've always seen, minus a few periods, decades here and there. On the whole, up until the 1750s or thereabout, the ummah's story was a story of success and victory. 1750 became clear, if anyone had doubts, that the fortunes had taken a turn. So tragedy of Palestine for Muslims today encapsulates like the tragedy of what the ummah as a whole everywhere has suffered. Okay, it's just like kind of rubbing salt into the wound. And that's why, for these various reasons, Palestine is so important. There was a Muslim imagination. It signified the glory and the victory of Islam in so many ways. Religiously, spiritually, politically, empire-wise. And then to see what it has become, it kind of stabs the spiritual soul of the believer. Even though the believers know many more Muslims have physically died in other lands and areas more than Palestine. So it's not that the Palestinian Muslim blood is more holier or sacred or more important than the blood of any other Muslim. Absolutely not. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. The noblest of people in the sight of God are those who have the most piety. And nor is it the case that the bricks and mortars of any holy masjid is more important than the lives of the believers. We know this in an athar, in a statement from Umar radiallahu anhu. It's also reported from Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. And At-Tirmidhi quotes this as a marfu hadith, as a hadith that goes all the way back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with some discussion about how authentic or not it is. That Umar radiallahu anhu, or in this case Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, is looking at the Kaaba and he's saying, by Allah, wallahi, how sacred you are to me, how great is your hurma and your izzah. But the hurma, the sanctity of a believer is greater than you. Because in the end, the Kaaba, the first house dedicated to God, bottom line is bricks and stones and mortar. It's a qibla, it's a masjid, it's one of the great shi'ar, the greatest of the shi'ar of Allah, greatest of the symbols, religious symbols of God. But it's not like the heart that beats with Iman and through whose blood runs Tawheed and the acceptance of Risala. So the early Salaf understood that bricks and mortars are not the same as soul, flesh and bones in terms of Tawheed and Iman. Okay? The tragedy is because Palestine really in Muslim imagination has always been, this is how things should be. Right? Slide 2, something a bit quicker. 2017, exactly 100 years ago, 1917. Okay, it's not that I want you to do the maths. Many things happened in 1917, not because I was around, but because I just know, okay, just in case the white hair fooled you. Okay. 3 things that I want to mention very quickly, 1917. One of them has no bearing on the Palestinian issue. 2 of them have a bearing, but all of them have a bearing really to do with kind of Britain, our homeland, what most of us call home, and politics. Okay, 1917, it's the year when the royal family changed their name because there was political need and pressure for them to do so. So 1914 to 1918 was, what was that historically? Yeah, the Great War. It turned out to be World War I. This was the war to end all wars, but you know that it wasn't quite what happened. Okay, but so it was the Great War. Sometimes when I'm kind of really agitated, I just call it the Great European War because that's what it was: Europeans fighting and everybody else getting dragged along into it. And World War II was European War II, and even more other non-Europeans got dragged into it. But let's just call it the Great War in the language that we're in, or World War I. And somewhere at the end of World War I, something happened that never happened before in war. The Germans, who had already occupied France, they flew some planes over Britain and just dropped bombs on anywhere meaning London. And they killed civilians. Now, previous wars, World War I and wars before that, were armies fighting armies. And of course, over the last 100 years, those wars had become mechanized. You had rifles, you had cannons, you had mechanical warfare, so you had even more bloodshed. But no one ever let's just go and kill civilians. The Germans did that in 1917. So over certain parts of southeast London, Poplar, for example, there was a school that was just blown up. I mean, the school wasn't targeted, the area was targeted. The school just happened to be. Buckingham Palace suffered some things, and various parts of East London. And civilians died. And this enraged the public even more against Germans. There was already anti-German sentiment because that's the war. But when they did this is like, they broke all the rules. Saxe-Coburg Gotha was the real German head of the German Empire, kind of royalty. King George V, our king then, was also called Saxe-Coburg Gotha. That was his family line. Queen Victoria married a Saxe-Coburg Gotha. She spoke German better than or as fluent as she spoke English. Her husband was Germanic through and through. All the children kind of spoke German, and the children's children spoke German, and King George, I think, might have had a German wife. It's all German, right? But they're British. And a lot of the public who are fighting in this war that was only supposed to last 3 or 4 months, lasting 4 years and so many people killed, they're kind of like, there was a concern. Will the average person, not from the middle class or the upper class or the gentry, but just the working class people, will they be able to stomach this? They have been the victims of acts of terror beyond war. They are the ones who've sent themselves and their children, their sons, into the front line more than anyone else. Will their anti-German sentiment, because now they were smashing up shops that had decisively German names, sweet shops or factories, just to protest against, because they're angry against Germany, and that their anger spilled over this way. The royal family were thinking, uh-oh, we need to kind of identify zero with Germany and our cousins, okay, and more with just, and so they had to think of a name, and they thought of, obviously, Windsor. So they rewrote the thing. Queen Victoria started the House of Windsor, although in her time, she didn't even use the word Windsor, other than there was Windsor Castle, which is a royal place. Otherwise, it's Saxe Coburg Gotha. You teach your children German, you get married, you probably get them married to Germans, German everything. And Germany was the cultural hub of Western Europe at that time anyway. Philosophically, culturally, musically, it was the center. So that's interesting, how popular resentment can derail a royal family line. Okay, poor thing about Prince Philip, the Queen's husband, is that even his children couldn't take his name, Mountbatten, because the word Windsor, the term Windsor, became so strong, and they want to perpetuate that. Okay, that the children got called after the mother and not the father, even though the father protested. Never mind, we make dua for him. The second of the three things that I want to mention directly concerning Palestine, Al-Aqsa, 1917 is the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration is when the Foreign Secretary of Britain, Arthur Balfour, with the approval of the king of the country, King George V, and the Prime Minister, which I think was Lloyd George, and also the American president, because America had a growing strong political economic clout. Balfour issued a declaration to Rothschild on behalf of the Zionist movement in Britain, saying that we will grant you a homeland to the Jewish people in Palestine. A homeland to the Jewish people in Palestine. That was 1917. It was corresponded at that time. Of course, 1948 is when it actually practically came into effect. But from that time, many of the Jewish diaspora who had suffered horrifically, not for 100 years or 200 years, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years at the hands of Western Christian Europe. Okay? All sorts of abominations. I'm not saying that the Muslim world's record with the Jewish population was 100%, but it was so much better. There wasn't ever an idea of fleeing en masse Muslim persecution. There might have been individuals, there might have been a ruler or two who kind of missed the mark. There might have been attitudes here and there that could have been more prophetic towards al-Yahud. But on the whole, there wasn't these pogroms, these mass attacks, and you are the one who murdered God, Jesus Christ, the Christians, until the Second Vatican Council of 1964 or 65 believed as an aqidah that the Jews were responsible for the death of their deity. Okay? So you can imagine what kind of feelings that they had over the thousands of years. So in the end, there was a lot of lobbying and political pressure. Balfour issued the declaration in 1917. Rightly or wrongly, They're going to be celebrating in the Royal Albert Hall 100 years of the Balfour Declaration very soon, perhaps in November or thereabouts. And this becomes the great festering sore, not just in British politics, but and what to do with the Jewish diaspora, the Jewish problem. Let's just send it over there. It becomes a problem even up until now. That kind of the blood and the bloodstained hands starts here from the Balfour Declaration. And this is not just Muslim sentiment. Many non-Muslims would say something similar in similar colourful language. 1917 is another reason. Something else happened, and it happened in what we now call Palestine, in Gaza. Now listen to this carefully. It was clear by that time Western Europe were the dominant powers on earth. It was also clear that the Ottoman Empire is on its last legs. This is an empire that has cancer at its heart, and it's just killing off all the limbs slowly and steadily. When we'll give you 3 months to a year or 6 months to a year to live. That's really what was happening to the Ottoman Khilafah at that time. Nonetheless, even in this state of decay and the diagnosis of cancer, politically, economically, militarily, the empire, the Khilafah, still managed to achieve some amazing political and military feats. Gallipoli, for example, was one of those things where, against all the odds, the Ottoman Empire were victorious over a hugely strong, dominant superpower, British Empire, along with the French, along with the Australians. I mean, on paper, it's like they should have been, this is a Premier Division clubs playing like kind of a Sunday football club in the local area, in the local park. It should have been like a whitewash. The 3 battles happened in Gaza in 1917 with Britain and her allies versus the weakened Ottoman Empire. Okay. Battle 1, March 1917, they won. Battle 2, April 1917, the Ottomans won as well. Again, it's like, what's going on? November, 6 odd months later, Battle 3 in the same year, they lost, and really that was the end. And one of the reasons they lost, one of the significant factors you see, is that the Arab revolt, so the Ottomans is crumbling, the Arabs, Palestinian area, Jordan area, that kind of overall area, they realized that one, the Ottomans always spent more money on themselves and hardly any money on the Arabs, certainly not on it wasn't called Palestine, but that territory which we call Palestine. The Arabs also thought that, there is Turkish nationalism because the Khilafat has really kind of crumbled. A lot of people came up, the young Turks came up, they secularized, Turkey needed to modernize. So there was a nationalist movement that had really restricted whatever was left of Sharia law and practice at 1917. So the Arabs were probably thinking that, look, it's going to fall, they're going to have Turkish nationalism, what are we going to be left with? Let's have this Arab nationalism and just work for Arab well-being and welfare. Part of that included, if we side with Britain, and Britain has promised us Arab unity and independence after the war. Wow, we're going to get Arab unity and independence, okay? And Lawrence of Arabia, he was told by, the bigwigs up the top that, look, work with them and promise them this. And whether he was genuine or not, he promised them this, but they had already made other plans anyway, okay? So actually, the Arabs, not all of them, because they didn't all think like this, but a significant number of them, for various reasons, fought against the Caliphate, the Khilafah, on the side of the non-Muslims. in Gaza. If these people had any sense of deen, they would have realized that, look, you know what? There is probably going to be, wallahu a'lam, some serious consequence of not just fighting Muslims, that's bad enough, but fighting the last vestiges of a caliphate that goes back all the way to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in terms of being his the successors. Okay? And regardless of what people say, and regardless of the extremism that some Muslims have gone into, and regardless of needing to live and integrate and be part of the fabric of this society, Khilafah is it's not like the Imamah, kind of one of the great creeds, but it is from the Fara'id. It is from the Fara'id, the obligations, and it has so many social, political, religious benefits. But to fight against them, 3 battles of Gaza, the Arabs joined hands with the non-Muslims and fought the Ottoman Caliphate. Even though the Caliphate was so different to how it was 100 years ago. And there were so many things wrong with it, but it still was the Caliphate. Okay? The thing about that is, my brothers and elders and sisters, that we may do things politically or just as individuals which really Islam neither approves of or clearly forbids. And there's a difference between sinning, oh, I shouldn't have done that, and having the remorse. Maybe my pride doesn't allow me to acknowledge that I've sinned. You know, I've kind of taken your money. It wasn't clear. I mean, in my heart of hearts, I knew it was your money, but if I looked at it from that angle, maybe it was my money. But in my heart of hearts, I knew it was your money. But my pride, and I don't like you anyway, that's stuff, it's not true, but let's just say I don't like you anyway. So my pride and my dislike of you is not going to allow me to admit it, but in my heart of hearts. So when you're not looking, maybe 3 or 4 days later, 3 or 4 months later, Ya Allah, forgive me. And Ya Allah, forgive me for my weakness, that I'm not going to even be able to return the money back to him, because then he'll see, I told you so. And then my reputation will go down. But I know I've done wrong. And there's a hope there. There's a glimmer of hope from God there that something can be excused. There would be a glimmer of hope that, we fought against the caliphate. I know we were promised and we just felt on the back foot. And maybe there's a glimmer of hope that there might be some excuse there. If you kind of, there is divine generosity. But when you have an Arab history of that region that tells you that the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Turks was a good thing, and it was taught in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s in textbooks, in schools and colleges and academic circles as something virtuous, but the treachery came from Britain, that it didn't kind of work out. Where is the tawbah? And if we think that our spiritual lives is disconnected from our political lives, we need to go back and read Quran 101 again. Okay, Islam 101 again has to be reread. So let me just mention 1 or 2 things about sins and their social consequences, not just politically what I've mentioned here, just generally as well, because there is a fa'idah in this, inshallah. I'm going to pull out this book. There's many books, but I've always loved this book. 1, because it's just so spiritually written. Ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullah alayh, Dawah, the illnesses and the cures. And he has a small section here that goes on about sins. So I'm not going to read the small section. I'm just going to take some hadiths there, just to kind of give us a reminder of the overview of not just sins to the individual. So, for example, somewhere here, there's, for example, the Prophet ﷺ says in a hadith which is Hasan, Inna rajula liyahramu rizqa bidhambi yusibuhu. Indeed, a person's rizq or sustenance is prohibited to him or denied him due to a sin he commits. Sins can cause the barakah, the blessings of Allah to go in our daily lives. In another Sahih Hadith, the Prophet said, no two people who love each other for the sake of Allah, and in another riwayah for the sake of Islam, and separation occurs between them, except due to a sin one of them has committed. A sin one of them has committed. Imagine if many sins have been committed on both sides. So relationships, marriages, friendships can actually break up due to sins. Sins have a powerful effect of removing Allah's barakah and veiling them from receiving the goodness of ordinary life. So that's individually. This is my my phone there. Let me talk collectively about sins. The Prophet ﷺ said, إذا تبايعتم بالعينة وأخذتم أذناب البقر ورضيتم بالزرع وتركتم الجهاد سلط الله عليكم ظلا لا ينزعه عنكم حتى ترجعوا إلى دينكم. When you deal in ina, certain transactions involving subtle usury, and you hold on to the tails of the cows and content yourself with farming, live a 9-to-5 life and you're content with that, and abandon striving in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's path, sallallahu alaykum dhulla. Allah will permit your humiliation. He will not lift this humiliation from you hatta tarju ila dinikum, until you return to your religion. It doesn't matter what the superpowers to be are saying, or the time is saying. It doesn't matter how much we're protesting or tweeting on Facebook, I love Allah and it's my profile pic, I got a heart and it's pulsating away, I love God, I love the Prophet. But in the end, if it's not hatta tarju ila dinikum, returning back to our religion, meaning back to practicing our religion, because we're already Muslims, alhamdulillah, then the sallallahu alaykum, the humiliation won't be lifted. Allah Himself won't lift the humiliation. The Quran says in Surah Ibrahim, لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَإِن كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ. If you show gratitude to me, I will increase you in my blessings and favors. But if you show ingratitude to me, then indeed my punishment is terrible. And ingratitude here means disobedience. The Prophet, the Quran says, again, just showing us about obedience and disobedience to a collective, to a society. وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا كَرْيَةً كَانَتْ آمِنَةً مُطْمَئِنَّةً يَأْتِيهَا رِزْقُهَا رَغَدًا مِنْ كُلِّ مَكَانٍ فَكَفَرَتْ بِأَنْعُمِ اللَّهِ فَأَذَاقَهُ اللَّهُ الْجُوعِ وَالْخَوْفِ بِمَا كَانُوا يَصْنَعُونَ. Allah gives to you an example of a town or a city enjoying peace and security, abundantly supplied with sustenance from all directions. Yet it became ungrateful for the favors of Allah. So Allah made it taste of hunger and terror in the extreme, closing in on it like a garment from every direction. بِمَا كَانُوا يَصْنَعُونَ, because of what it had done. What had it done? It became ungrateful for the favors of Allah and started sinning. Allah gives you the blessing of sight and I use it to look at something haram. Allah gives me the blessings of speech and I go and do something haram with the tongue. Allah gave me a camel and I rode it to a pub, right? Or those type of ingratitudes, okay? Allah gave me and I thanked somebody else and not Allah. Allah then changes the state of safety and economic security. Isn't that what every country wants? Political safety, aman, and rizq. Just economic security. It's the same thing that in Li'ila fi Quraysh, Surah Quraysh, same thing. Haven't we given you safety and haven't we given all you the blessings? Because every nation needs that. Allah is saying, look, this nation had it, this place had it. And then they became ungrateful and disobedient, so we changed the situation and we made them fearful of their enemies, and any day now they could be conquered, and they had economic problems in terms of food and water shortages or dams busting or whatever it be that causes problems in one's food cycle. Why? Sins. SubhanAllah. Last narration in this regard. Let's see the attitude of the Sahaba and the Tabi'un. So this is a narration in the Musnad of Ahmad from one of the Tabi'un, and his name is Jubayr ibn Nufayr, rahmatullah alayh. Jubayr ibn Nufayr is from the second generation of Muslims, and he had the blessings to accompany the likes of Abu Darda radiallahu anhu when the Muslims conquered Cyprus in the early days. So he says, لما فتحت قبرص. So when we conquered Cyprus, ففرق بين أهلها فبكى بعضهم إلى بعض. When we conquered Cyprus, we found the people became scattered, and each of them were crying to each other that they were largely Christian, Catholic Christians. They had been defeated by these Arabs from across the water. And I saw them crying one to another. They were crying one to another. رأيت أبو درداء جالسا وحده يبكي. And amongst that situation of Muslim victory, I saw Abu Darda radiallahu anhu sitting alone, weeping. Sitting alone, weeping. Everybody's jumping for joy from the Muslims. The only people who are shedding tears are the conquered. And yet this Muslim, Sahabi, is weeping. فقلت يا أبو الدرداء ما يبكيك في يوم أعز الله فيه الإسلام وأهله. Oh Abu Darda, I said to him, what makes you weep on this day that Allah has given izzah, has given honor to Islam and its people? فقلت فقال, so he said, ويحك يا جبير, woe be to you, O Jubayr. And what a silly question. Woe be to you, O Jubayr. ما أحوان الخلق على الله عز وجل إذا أدعوا أمره. How insignificant and irrelevant a people become in the sight of Allah when they turn away from His command. بينما هي أمة قاهرة ظاهرة لهم الملك. Before us is a people that used to be evidently strong and powerful, and they had dominion and political authority. تركوا أمر الله فصاروا إلى ما ترى. But then they abandoned the commands and the obedience to God. And so you now see what has become of them. What has become of them? Allah has allowed another people, us, to conquer them. So the one who learns from the prophetic niche, he has the greatest political insight that no one else understands. Abu Darda is from the Zuhad as well. It's from the people of piety and worldly renunciation, from the Sahaba. Okay, so he's not known to be from the great fuqaha in terms of fatwa and those type of things. Of course, he's an alim billah wa bi ahkamihi, no doubt. But he's known very much to have the fiqh al-batin, the inward fiqh, the inward understanding of what life and reality is all about. Okay, and much of that suluk tradition we take from the likes of Abu Darda radiallahu anhu. He's crying, weeping, sorry. Doesn't that tell you something about, you got the masses of Muslims, alhamdulillah, but the real understanding of the prophetic sunnah and the prophetic life and how to look at the world with the prophetic eyes are taken from the likes of him, radiallahu anhu. He sees it purely in terms of commands and prohibitions, loving Allah or putting dunya or one's ego over Allah. When we don't get this, it doesn't matter what we stand up for. If we stand up for other than Allah, or insincerely do things for Allah, or do things for Allah knowingly that Allah had sent something different, it doesn't matter who we're trying to please. Ultimately, more than likely, Allah is going to ruin that situation for us because the barakah will be gone. We can all stand up for Arab, non-Arab, Turkish, Asian, Pakistani, African, West African nationalism. We can all go down the road of liberal secularism and try to please the dominant powers to be and to fit into the monoculture. We can do many things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasn't really quite made the Muslim story. But if it's disobedience, there are likely to be consequences, not just in the hereafter, in this world. And the reality is what? The Arab revolt, they revolted against the caliphate, not all of the Arabs, I must stress. And what was the natija? They got an even bigger betrayal by the guys who know how to play it best, Great Britain. We knew how to play the game. So whilst they promised Hussein, who later will become king of certain parts of the Arab lands, look, we will give you Arab independence and unity. They promised the French that between them and Britain and France, we will carve up the Middle East after the war. And they promised some other people something else, which I can't remember. And all three of those were mutually exclusive promises that you couldn't fulfill all of them. It's either going to be one or the other, but it couldn't have been all three. You act treacherously, you receive treachery. As Ibn al-Qayyim says in another book, Al-Wabil al-Sayyib, but although he says it in terms of Allah, as you behave with Allah, Allah will behave with you likewise. But there is also a rule in Islam, as you behave with others, Allah will cause others to behave with you likewise. We have a saying in English, what goes around comes round. We're doing treachery, someone's going to be treacherous towards us. And in the end, if we're really truthful to ourselves, 1917, 1945, well, what happened? Independence, 1948, 1967, what happened? In most cases, we had shabby tyrants, oppressors, okay, just people unfit for purpose to rule. And humiliation didn't get lifted of us. The Arab world met the most humiliation. I mean, the Indonesians could say, right, okay, we had a tough time and, 200 years ago we were a bit backward and whatever, but at least they can hold up their head something, or Malaysians more particularly. The Arab world, wow, it's just been one humiliation after the humiliation after humiliation. I mean, it's not just the Arab world. I mean, Pakistan, the land of the pure, that's just a failed story, okay? Saudi would be a failed story if they didn't make a military agreement back in like the late 40s with America, that you give us internal security and we give you cheap oil. Otherwise, that, wallah, would have probably been a failed story. But the whole region is a failed story, right? It's not something we laugh about when we don't say that just pointing fingers. We say that with a heavy heart. It's a failed story. And a lot of that failure is because we really haven't, especially that region, perhaps, wallahu alam, this is my opinion, so it's not fatwa or nas. It's possible, and I've heard this from some of the mashayikh, that some of the non-Arab mashayikh, that if you don't make tawbah for something that you know is wrong, and you treat it as a virtue, rebellion against a khilafah, what is going to happen? Is it the rida of Allah or the ghadab of Allah? And isn't politics really at the heart of it? The rida of Allah, the ghadab of Allah, the pleasure of Allah, the anger of Allah. If Allah's out the equation, just call it politics, but don't call it siyasa sharia, don't call it Islamic politics. If Allah's out the equation in anywhere, whether in what's trying to happen in Tunisia, what happened back then in Pakistan, and the flee from India, what happened there after the Balfour Declaration, if it's not Allah and ibadah and seeking and submitting to Him lovingly at the heart of the equation, then it's not Islamic politics. You be Muslim, you're Muslim still, but it's not Islamic politics, is it? It's just politics. Either liberal secular politics or socialist politics or something, but it's not Islamic. Okay? And you can paint the flag green and whatever, it doesn't make it necessarily Islam. So once we're not kind of clear on that, our whole political narrative and discourse becomes at the core rotten and misaligned from the start. So sins invite individual and social calamities and civilizational destruction. The Quran is full of that, the Ad and the Thamud and so on and so forth. And the way to repel this is through tawbah and return to obedience. Hatta tarji'u ila dinikum, until you return to your religion. Okay, very quickly now, 2 more slides. Our duty to Al-Aqsa. So this is really getting to the heart of the matter. Regardless of what I've said about any country or people that is suffering calamities, and they don't even have to be Muslims in this discussion as well, and certainly they don't include just Muslims. Wherever there is calamity, wherever there is human tragedy, individually, collectively, few or many, then as Muslims, we want to be in a state of khidmah, of service. How do I best alleviate the immediate suffering? There may be long-term plans and advices that I want to give you, but right now, you need money for bread. You need me to fix your tap so you can get clean drinking water. Then later on, I can tell you that your career choice is wrong. Okay? But right now, you just need the essentials. So whenever the tragedies happen when they spike up in Gaza, less so in the West Bank, for example, in the West Bank at the moment now. So remember the Palestinian territories. So the Brits, when they gave the Jewish homeland in 1948, Israel was established. Primarily the Brits trained some of the Jews, some of the Israelis, in counterinsurgency and counterintelligence and military tactics, but they didn't do that for the Palestinians. They allowed the Jews to set up political institutions and social institutions for the long-term establishment of a state. They forbade that to the Palestinians, right? You couldn't do it, okay? There were things that they did for the Jews, the Israelis primarily, they were Jews, that they didn't allow the Palestinians to do. So we still now speak of the state of Israel and Palestinian territories, which is kind of 2 broad territories, right? So you've got Gaza, okay, which is as big as my garden and your garden, all right, okay, with 1 million+ people. And then you've got the West Bank. And the West Bank contains Jerusalem, somewhere roughly in the middle. Okay, so if you say Hebron is at the bottom, okay, in the south, and if you say Nablus is near the top, and so in Jerusalem is somewhere in the middle. So West Bank at the moment, Gaza is always the biggest prison cell on earth, open prison on earth, and most of us know that. West Bank tended to be a little bit more stable, but even then, apparently reports are saying that in Hebron, some Israelis, because they're getting even more bold, they've gone in and taken over a mosque for the last 2 weeks and taken this child and that. Now, how true these specific reports are, I don't know. But the general attitude is that many of the Israeli Jews don't want Arabs to be in their land. Some of them speak about extermination, Nagasaki, Hiroshima tactics and techniques. A few of them want to live peacefully. Apparently, a survey has showed a growing number of young Israelis from the new generation, 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds. They don't understand what all the great fuss is about of their grandparents or whatever. Now we've got Palestinian Arabs with us. Let's just learn to live together. Those who are generally 30+ or 40+, old school, they've got a particular vision. And that vision is there can be no non-Jewishness in the sacred state of Israel. That has to be dealt with. So du'as and humanitarian aid, where and when. Du'as consistently, humanitarian aid especially when the problems spike. Okay, I say when the problems spike because if they don't spike in Palestine, they spike everywhere else, don't they? So we're always giving humanitarian aid. Secondly, increase our lobbying power to put political pressure on our governments. And I say this before demonstrations because this is just my opinion. Demonstrations tend not to do anything significant. I'm not saying that they have no benefit. I'm just saying they don't have. Washington or Whitehall is unlikely to change their foreign policy because 1,000 or 10,000 of us demonstrated. They may mind their language, they may do things more secretively, but they're probably not going to change foreign policy. Lobbying, at a serious degree of lobbying, Hindu, Indians lobbying Washington now, it has an effect. You see what the Indian government over the last 10 years, when India is becoming an economic powerhouse, okay, and a technological powerhouse, you see what kind of things the Indian government has lobbied, particularly for Indian Hindus in the United States of America. Because lobbying actually works. What that means for us here is that we need to really improve our lot all around, our connection with Allah, because Allah is the one who gives. Biyadihil khair, it's in His hands, okay, and it always will be, and it always has been. But dunya-wise, if we have that kind of lobbying power, we're all unemployed because we're all studying Sharia, right? And we don't own our houses, we don't have any economic, political clout. We're just a bunch of unemployed people, okay, that have memorized Bukhari, unlikely to make much political clout. And this is from someone who has spent like the best part of his life doing exactly that, not memorizing Bukhari, I wish, okay, but seeking sacred ilm and studying Sharia sciences. But we need other things for political clout, okay? Then I've mentioned demonstrations, if at all effective, and I'll leave that to your judgment, because it's one of the things about modern demonstrations compared to Badr, Uhud, and the various battles that are stated in the Quran. Do you remember in the Quran when Badr happens, pre-Badr, just before Badr is about to kick off, all right? Kick-off is like 1 o'clock, right? The whistle's going to blow. 12:30, Allah puts them to sleep. Like 12 o'clock, Allah puts them to sleep. And they sleep for about an hour or whatever, and they get up, whatever, and then the whistle blows. But hold on, you think, if you're going to go to war, it's like boxers, right? They're in their room, and they're shadow boxing. They might got the picture of their opponent, and and they're like that, and they're coming out to Eye of the Tiger, and like they don't come out to Beethoven's Fifth, like that, and then or some sleepy nursery rhyme, because you want the adrenaline. Allah has other plans. Allah doesn't want the adrenaline flowing. He puts them to sleep. And that happened in Uhud similarly. Why? Because the Quran describes the kuffar as being people of hamiyya, jahiliyyah. They've got this rage and this agitation of the pre-Islamic days, like that. And it describes the believers as a people in a state of sakina. Because when the heart is still, not the heart is lackadaisical or lazy. When the heart is still, but it's concerned, it's connected. You have a pool of water. I know it's a bad example. It's the only one I could think of. You have a pool of water, a pond. If there is little wind and it's still, your reflection is more or less as it appears. You see things as they truly are. But when when a fierce wind skims over it, or you throw a pebble in it, and you agitate the water, and then you look at your reflection, the reality is distorted. When the heart is still in a state of tumanina for Allah, ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub, indeed in the remembrance of Allah, do hearts find stillness and tranquility, then there can be a alaqa, a connection between us and Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, politically as well. So demonstrations quite don't meet that sakina. Although having said that, what was that European country just 2 days ago? Was it Spain and Catalan? They're demonstrating peacefully. They're just literally standing there. One of the European countries, and I think it's Spain, and we won't quite yet say Catalonia, depending upon what view you have, okay, because it's not separated yet. But they decided we're just going to stand there, literally still, and that is our demonstration. In that way, okay, that might be something. But the point being is, normally demonstrations tends to be hamiyya, everyone letting off steam, getting angry, chanting slogans, getting really angry, burning flags, death to America, death to this, death to everybody. And that's not really the Muslim way. It doesn't, being brought up on a housing estate in East London for like 35 years of like my 52-year life, okay, and in the 70s, and a housing estate which in the 70s was all white, a housing estate in the 80s was almost all black. you realize very quickly, words don't count. You just have to have the bravery or the courage or the stupidity to do what you need to do. Words are cheap. Politically, it's the same thing. No one's going to be concerned, apart from comedians, about, words of Muslims. Comedians in this country, they don't like to offend us. They think that their career is going to end very quickly if they make a joke about Islam. But generally, foreign policy, it doesn't really affect it. That's what I'm trying to say. This is an opinion. If you think it's completely wrong, you're not obliged to take it. Whether there is a single state solution for Palestine or a two-state solution, it's not for me to say. A lot of it is not even for ulama to say. It's really down to the people on the ground there. But whether there is a one-state or a two-state solution, Masjid al-Aqsa, religiously, deen-wise, must remain in the hands of the people of Tawheed, must remain in the hands of the Muslims. The Palestinians, whoever they are, even if they're all Muslims, have no right to bargain on the behalf of the whole of the ummah about the third holiest site. But what they do other than that, they're the ones who are better in a better position to decide what to do. Well, and Allah knows best, with good advice and scholarly input somewhere, I'm sure. Masjid al-Aqsa must remain in the hands of the people of Tawheed. Our duty. Finally, our duty to the ummah, by and large, must deepen our individual connection with Allah, hatta tarju ila dinikum, because we're all part of the ummah. If I sin, mathalan, a little sin cloud goes up, and if like 10 of us sin, just above Dagenham, there is a sin cloud that doesn't block out the sunlight, it blocks out the light, the nur of Allah's barakah. The more we sin, the more that happens. So in a hadith in the Musnad of Ahmad, I'll just quote the mafhum in English, the Prophet ﷺ says, when sins become widespread amongst the people, then Allah Jalla Jalaluhu will punish them all. So one of the Ummul Mu'mineens, they said to the Prophet ﷺ, Ya Rasulullah, I think it's Salama radiallahu anha, she said, Ya Rasulullah, even if it includes salihun, righteous people amongst them? He said, yes, even if it includes righteous people amongst them. Then she said, so what happens? I mean, they're righteous, what happens? He said, the calamity, the disaster comes to all of them, but on the Day of Judgment, Allah will raise up the righteous into paradise. Okay, when sins become widespread. In another hadith, when zina and riba become widespread, then expect the destruction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have more than that is widespread, okay, in majority Muslim lands. Okay, so it's not that we want any majority Muslim country to be backwards. We want for our brothers what we want for ourselves. Okay, and we really hope that Crown Prince Salman's 2030 vision, whatever, really helps the country and the people in that country, deen-wise and dunya-wise and deen-wise. But generally you wonder, okay, if the foundations aren't there, and if it's going to just increase the potential for me to sin, how is that actually drawing closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His barakah? And if, I'll come to the point of moderation, but if moderation is not what the book and the sunnah is saying, and moderation is what is being defined somewhere else, then again, how does that bring me closer to the divine reality? Okay, so must deepen our connection as individuals. Okay, must say no to the politics of rage and resentment. If it's not for Allah, lillah, fillah, billah, and it's just for the nafs, the ego, they did this to us, I'll do that to them. If it was for Allah, they did this to us, I'll do that to them. It's for Allah, right? Okay, there's something there in the Sharia, with rules and boundaries. But if it's they killed our civilians, we will kill theirs, is not from that thing. That's definitely out of the question. But if it's just they did this, we will do that, and it's always rage, resentment. Why are they powerful? Why? I have I won't mention who it is. So I know a person who, before he was practicing, He was on a Pakistani plane back in, I think, in the 80s that got hijacked by some Muslim extremists. And it was meant to go some European place and whatever. And so this person was telling me that I was a doctor on board. So once the hijackers realized I'm a doctor and there wasn't any other doctor on the thing, I was like kind of being called by them to deal with this, because we were on for a couple of days. There were old people dehydrating and suffering and this, but and sitting down in one place. So I had a lot of things to do. And he said, even though I wasn't practicing and stuff, I said, what I also noticed is none of the hijackers prayed. And even though I understood that there is a thing about combining prayers, I didn't find even a single hijacker combining prayers. And I was everywhere, even in the kitchen area where the hijackers had, like, that was their main kind of office, because all the food and the drink is there. And then I thought at that time, what kind of Muslims are these who are hijacking in the name of Allah, which doesn't seem right, and they're not even praying? Okay. A lot of it was about we want to be. Okay, and I know this is a bad example, but you can expand it to a lot of human beings. So, and this is not encouragement of music, by the way. If you looked at Jamaica, the island of Jamaica, in the late 70s and the early 80s, it was economically really, really poor. And there was a lot of political violence, and there was a lot of economic oppression, and so much. And the music of the island reflected the poverty, the struggle in the ghetto, and so on and so forth. Since independence, since the 60s. Round about the mid or the late 80s, when the island, and this country, by the way, we kind of became, a bit more prosperous, there was more of an economic liberalism going on. You see the nature of the music becomes more dancehall, whatever, and now it's not about struggling and suffering and this, that, and the other, and poor, and it's all about dunya, bling and whatever. A lot of people they will talk the talk Islamically when it's need be, but once they're well-to-do, then that's fine. It's for many of us, it's about as long as I'm okay, and whilst I'm not, I can do this. So I'll go to circles. This is something that I saw so many times, not recently, because I'm really a bit too old for this now. A lot of people would come to circles back in the late 80s, early 90s, and grow their beards and look the part, and then looking for marriage. They're looking for a good religious wife, quite understandably, and then they get a good religious wife. End of circles. End of studying deen. End of giving great charity. End of spending free time reaching out to people, because you got what you wanted. It was less about God and more about your material well-being. Because merely growing a beard and wearing a hat doesn't change the heart from Ahl Dunya to Ahl Zuhud. There's a lot of work needs to be done. Anyway, must say no to the politics of rage and revenge. Must denounce suicide bombings, extremist readings of Islam, and Western-inspired definitions of moderation. So must denounce suicide bombings. It really, Hamas, and I'm not on the ground. It's true, I'm not in the ground. When you have this political rage, deen-wise, it doesn't do anything good. It doesn't call down the barakah of Allah. Even politically, as a political thing, there was more sympathy for the Palestinian cause in Western Europe before this blowing up men and children in cafes and on buses. Even if you can justify that every Israeli woman is conscripted into obligatory military service. Yeah, okay, but you kind of really stretch the Sharia there to justify that. Because even the best opinion in fiqh, and you find this in, perhaps, I definitely know this in the Shafi school, and as a Hanbali, following the Hanbali school, it's in the Hanbali school, that you can't eliminate a woman soldier unless she's on the battlefield. And then some of the Shafis were even stricter. Unless she's on the battlefield and her spear or her sword is pointed towards you. Because she could be on the battlefield going to pick some fruit. Whatever. But she's pointing a sword your way, or she's kind of like got the bow string drawn like that. This is less about picking strawberries, right? And doing some serious damage. Then She is a lawful combatant that can be eliminated from the battlefield. But if she's, in her uniform, walking to the bread shop down the road, away from the battlefield, the fiqh of the Sunni madhahibs doesn't allow her to be targeted. How are you going to move from that to obligatory conscription? They're in a cafe with their children, let's blow them up. So must denounce, must be clear on denouncing suicide bombing, not because we will get brownie points from our government or from non-Muslims, because it's irrelevant what non-Muslims think. It's absolutely irrelevant what the non-Muslims, our fellow citizens, think about this view. What is relevant is it right? Does it reflect the Sharia teachings? Is it indicative of the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ? Must denounce suicide bombings, extremist readings of Islam, and also Western-inspired definitions of moderation. We want to be moderate, we really do, but not the moderation that comes from other than the Sharia. Okay? So must call out Zionism for what it is, and it is, unfortunately, a racist ideology. Which twists and subverts the basic Jewish faith and the basic spiritual life. If you've ever engaged Jewish rabbis, especially those who have studied scripture, their scripture and their midrash and their teachings, you find, whoa, these kind of people really spiritual, or they've got a lot of spiritual things to say. And I am still an avid reader of the ex-chief rabbi of Britain, Jonathan Sacks. I think his books are from amongst the best books that help square religious life in a secular world, in a post 9/11 secular world, even though he comes from an Orthodox Jewish position. So there are things that you can't agree with, okay? But despite that, Zionism, this political Jewishness, or this over-politicization of Jewishness, must be called out for the racism and the inhumane vision that it has. We must affirm but on the other hand, we must affirm the Prophet's words, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, hadith in Bukhari. The Prophet was standing there in Medina, and he saw a janazah go by. So he stood up. Then a Sahabi came, then a Muslim came behind him and said, Ya Rasulullah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's the funeral of a Jew, of a Jewish man. And the Prophet turned around to him and he said, Alaysat nafsan, but isn't he a human soul? The indication there is, but he's a Yahud, he's a Jew, is that look, politically, they're against us. They've tried to kill, some of the tribes have tried to kill us. We've had to expel 2 of them, okay? They're siding with the mushriks against people who believe in Moses. You'd think that there'd be some commonality. So religious-wise, they oppose us. Politically, the Jews of Medina opposed the Prophet ﷺ in a vehement way. So he's saying, Ya Rasulullah, he's a Jew. Why are you standing? Alaysat nafsan. Even after he knows, he knows better than anyone how they differ religiously, how they differ politically, and he is the target of their political shenanigans. And yet he says, Alaysat nafsan, isn't he a human soul? So we can never forget that Jewish people, Alaysat nafsan, human soul. Politically, we've had so many differences with them. Today it's become very acute because it's covered over with Zionism, a new form of political Judaism, which has grabbed the imagination and the intellect of many Jews across the world and has subverted their kind of basic moral compass, as it has done with some of our brethren amongst the Muslims, not Zionism, but an extreme political form of Islam. 2 more points. Our duty to the ummah must learn that nationalism, secularism, or any other ism cannot be the Muslim story. I mean, it might be, there might be a maslahah there or whatever, so there might be leeway, but heart of hearts, it can't be the Muslim story. Okay? There is a manhaj of how to live our life, politically, economically, theologically, religiously, culturally, socially, and that's kind of well known amongst the Muslims and certainly with the Muslim scholars. Such isms have only brought further subjugation, humiliation, and divine debasement upon the Muslims. We are a living example of that in the present 21st century, and I think this might be the last but one point. Our way must be obedience and loving submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and our politics must not be one of the ego's resentment, rage, or retaliation. Our politics must be centered on justice, mercy, and upholding the glory of God. Because at the end of the day, it is only about the glory of God. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. I do have to say, and I hope that this can get edited in the middle of the talk as well as at the end, that many of these opinions, first of all of these opinions are mine and not the masjid's opinions, not the mosque's opinion or the Islamic centers, nor the organizers of this event. They are purely my own opinions. Some of those opinions are subjective opinions, and others are opinions of scholars not related to anyone in this establishment or organization. That should be known, inshallah ta'ala. Barakallahu feekum. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار اللهم أيقظنا من الغفلات ونجنا من الدركات وكفر عنا الذنوب والسيئات وجعلنا من الراشدين اللهم ألف بين قلوبنا وأصلح ذات بيننا وجعلنا من الراشدين ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين اللهم حقق النصر للأمة كل وقت وفي كل مكان اللهم حي لنا من أسباب النصر اللهم حي لنا من أسباب النصر يا رب العالمين. Bless the Masjid al-Aqsa and bring the Muslims of Palestine out of their oppression. Bring all of the Palestinians out of their oppression. Ya Rabbul Alameen, guide the Israelis and particularly the Zionists to being just. Ya Rabbul Alameen, guide them or break their backs. Ya Rabbul Alameen, allow justice and compassion to spread across your earth. Ya Rabbul Alameen, let us not be a generation who bring the world into further violent bloodshed, but let us be healers and not destroyers. Ya Rabbul Alameen, bring mercy and rahmah and barakah to Islam and the Muslims. Ya Rabbul Alameen, help all of those who are oppressed, help all of those who are suffering indignities, help all of those who are under the oppression of whatever tyrannies. Ya Rabbul Alameen, give every human being on the face of this earth the basic human dignities. You have said in your book, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي Adam, we have honored humanity, honoring them with basic dignities, basic rights. Ya Rabbal Alameen, grant those basic rights and dignities to every human being, and grant every human being the chance to come closer to Tawheed and to Iman. Let us be of those who help people come closer to Tawheed and Iman and not drive them further away. Let us be of benefit to Islam and the Muslims and not a harm and a hindrance to them. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.